The Battle of Olympus. This is an ancient story, a time when men and gods lived together. And welcome to Nostalgia, a chronological exploration of every NES game released in North America. I'm Mike.
I'm Sean.
And I'm Joe.
The Battle of Olympus. Many comparisons have been offered, even on our own Patreon feed, to Zelda 2, The Adventure of Link. I guess I could see it. The player is a hero, sword and a shield. It's a side-scrolling adventure game. You're traveling from town to town. You have to rescue a princess. I guess that's up for debate, like where she stands on like Zelda's hierarchy of princesses. But nevertheless, you have to rescue her. And believe it or not, a final confrontation with a shadow, just like in Zelda 2. So I guess there's a lot of similarities here in this game. Did you guys pick up on that pretty quickly?
Yeah, I'd even say that it goes even further. Like, the actual, yes, it's a side-scroller, but it also just, really feels like Zelda 2, down to just, the moment-to-moment, that jump feels like the jump from Zelda 2, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, it's that platformy combat side-scrolling that Zelda 2 sort of made popular, I guess, and or Faxanadu being the other example that we recently played.
Yeah, and I think with Faxanadu, the difference was the exploration of the map was all you were always on the same map, and you had to kind of scroll across and stuff like that. Whereas, to a lesser extent, Battle of Olympus, but definitely Zelda 2, they have this larger map where you travel between areas, and in Zelda 2 it's an actual overworld that you walk into the towns on the overhead map. In the Battle of Olympus, it's more like you're zoomed out for a second and you get to see where you are in Greece, and then you're brought back in to the same location.
Yeah, I mean, it could have also totally worked without that if they had just if they just told you where you were, but it seems like they wanted to have that map of Greece. So I feel like in that sense, it is a little closer to Faxanadu than it is to Legend of Zelda, where Legend of Zelda, the overworld plays such a big part.
So the Battle of Olympus poses itself as a very, big adventure on the NES, similar to other larger RPGs that we've played. Given the Greek setting and the fact that I recently read the Odyssey, I feel like it's good to start there and just think of, one of the most epic tales, one of the first stories ever told, I guess, in the grand scheme of literature. Is this, meeting that grandness of Greek literature and the compelling story? Let's just start with plot points, not actual gameplay grandness.
I mean, no, but hold on, you just recently, on your own accord, read the entirety of the Odyssey?
I went to Greece, so I thought it was, appropriate reading.
Oh, yeah, that was, the first travel blog.
Yeah.
The
Odyssey
took tips
really
from it, where to go.
Did you eat any lotus? Did you take any hallucinogenics?
I'll tell you one thing, though. I wasn't, when I went on my ferry to get from one island to another, I didn't wind up hearing a siren song and being called to it for 10 years thanks to the book.
That's true. That's probably for the best.
Yeah. I think about it. I could have been away from the podcast for 10 years if I didn't read the Odyssey.
So, okay. In terms of the plot of the Battle of Olympus, you play Orpheus, or I guess a child version of Orpheus, and you're looking for, the classical, mythological love interest of Orpheus, Helene, which is not really. It's Eurydice, but it's Helene in this game, and basically I guess Aphrodite really likes that you're in love with Helene, and she recruits all of her god friends to help you get to her, and that's what you do. You sort of knock on, you go door to door, knocking on the gods' temples and asking for gifts to get to Helene, and you do that.
Do we know if like we're playing like if they just picked Orpheus because it was a name from Greek mythology? Are we playing as like are we playing as Orpheus from Greek mythology? Because I did not think we were actually him because he's a child, first of all. And
he doesn't seem to have any musical talents.
I mean,
so
he has a harp eventually and an ocarina.
Yeah. But it doesn't seem to, like, come from that background. He just, like, he had to, like, in order to impress a girl in high school, you might take a guitar and not have that be, like, your defining characteristic. This seems like a half-baked version of Orpheus.
Or in order to summon a Pegasus to take you to a town over, you take up ocarina.
The flute.
Noted example of never use this in a school essay. Wikipedia says that Orpheus is the same Orpheus from Greek mythology. So do with that information what you will.
Yeah, it's just wrong. It's just wrong.
Right. I also it's not even nothing in the game implies that other than the harp, I suppose. But what I mean is like they just attached the reference to the other article on Orpheus inside the plot description of the Battle of Olympus. I don't think there's any like definitive evidence that links the two together.
Well, I mean, everything else does. Why else? I'm saying that the developer of the game wanted it to be Orpheus, but it does not matter because you get to name yourself and your girlfriend. So, you can name him Link.
Sean, that's a great point. This is one of the first games where you can name your girlfriend.
That's true.
Usually you only ever get to name like the hero character.
But this, you get to name your girlfriend. I mean, I don't even know the first time because I couldn't get that far in this game, so I never saw my girlfriend's name written out on the screen. But it's funny that they let you do it with how infrequent you'll see it.
But you know what? You can't name your character? Orpheus. It doesn't fit.
So I always named my character my name because I'm boring. But does that mean that like if you just don't fill it out, then it defaults to Orpheus?
I didn't try.
Right. How do we ever find out that this, other than the manual at the back of the box, like how do we ever find out?
It couldn't be spelled, if it does do it that way, it couldn't be spelled the way it's spelled in the manual because there's not enough character space.
Yeah. I don't know, maybe you're like Orphex or like RFX. That doesn't work.
So, Sean, you're beating up the plot a little bit, but now if we could introduce some of the gameplay, and let's just talk about exploration here. Being able to travel between multiple, real Greek locations, and yes, it's just a brief look at the overworld map before you're then brought back into the side-scrolling portion. Being able to travel between, Athens and all the way down to Crete, that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Like, that adds to the scale of, like, modern Greek mythology of how it seemed like even all that time ago, those guys just got around. Transportation was not an issue for these guys.
No, I mean, it seems like you could just go on, like, a midday stroll and accidentally end up in Peloponnesus. It's strange.
Well, you just walk into the wrong door, and then you walk out the other door, and now you're in another city.
Yeah, it's almost like in Pokemon, where you go through those caves that suddenly just happen to connect you between Pewter City and what's the one with the electric with Lieutenant Surge?
Golden. I don't know.
Nah, the Goldenrod's in gold and silver.
Yeah, whatever.
Vermilion City,
yeah, and it's just like those two. I mean, like I'm sure on a map it works out somehow, but like realistically, it's like how long was that underground tunnel?
Yeah.
That is what it feels like when you're going between these doors. It's like how long was the segue between these areas that I've jumped over to entirely different cities.
Well, what I took it as, maybe I'm just giving them like throwing them a bone here, is like that what the gameplay is like the stuff where the action is happening, and then when you get to the map, it's like okay, and then you travel the rest of the way, but nothing happens.
Yeah, I guess
it's like
you
the
can
boring
use that.
part of the world.
That sort of D&D-esque, like, and then you went the rest of the way. Yeah, I'll buy that.
But is it exciting to progress? Because it's one thing to say like, oh, you get to go, fight a lot of different enemies, and you get to see a lot of different things. But is the adventure scaling proportionally, or are you just kind of doing the same thing in new regions?
I think what makes it feel like it is more than just doing the same thing in new regions is that there's a good amount of items and elements that you run into that kind of guide you towards growth. So like you'll get better weapons. You get a weapon with a projectile. You get You get Hermes' sandals, which sounds lame, but it lets you like walk on treetops and jump higher, which lets you get to do. I mean, that's just classic like Metroidvania stuff. But even like the little power ups and stuff are sort of something that's like driving you throughout. At least I felt. And then we touched on like the story is not. Yeah, it's no Odyssey in any way, but like I don't know how this translated to kids in 1989, but if you're interested in Greek mythology, it's kind of cool to be like, oh, next I'm going to go to to find Athena, and then what's Ares going to have for me? It's like that they'll have something that might fit what you know about those gods. So like that's another thing that sort of like that propels me forward a little bit. It's like, what's going to be next in this Greek mythology that I'm already aware of?
Yeah, there's enough actual mythology, or at least like the background of a mythology, like that. Like if this was your first exposure to it, and then you started learning it in social studies or whatever the fuck you might learn about mythology in, you'd be like, oh yeah, I remember, like, Prometheus gave me my fire wand, or made my wand go fire, so that makes sense. So, that's pretty cool. In terms of the scale, though, and meeting all these guys, and I do think that this game feels big for however it's actually set up, which is more so like a big, like, interconnected maze.
Yeah, and I would just say, too, they've included some nice touches of gameplay and story, like mixing together things that don't necessarily matter, but are elements of just cool style in terms of storytelling. I think about every time you want to speak to the gods, in normal characters, you just walk up to the characters and you press the B button, which is usually your attack button, and can make some awkward looking screens where it looks like you're obviously you could never stab the NPCs, but it looks like you're stabbing them, and that's not nice. So I don't know why they would map the talk button to the stab button, but that can't happen with the gods. They're actually on the altar, and you can't like jump up over to them. So you try just pressing the talk button, and that doesn't work either. You figure out that you have to actually kneel before them to engage them in conversation, and I feel like that is a fun mix of gameplay and storytelling coming together that we don't usually see.
No, that was funny.
Yeah, it's immersion.
It was also pretty funny when I thought I got to Zeus, or some, it kind of looks like Jesus, but I thought I got to Zeus, and it immediately is just saying like, who are you? Get out of here. What are you doing here? And then I didn't know what to do, and I realized that I would like, I didn't go to the first place somehow. But that was a cool little bit of like environmental storytelling where you just didn't talk to the right guy first, and now no one likes you.
Yeah, because I did the same thing, because what it is you're supposed to, your first like task is to go talk to Zeus, which they do. Someone does tell you, so like I give them a pass for that. It is like a little bit of a missable thing where you're like, what am I supposed to do first?
Yeah, but you don't know if that's Zeus or not Zeus. It looks like Zeus.
That's true. I'm sure we'll talk about that too. There's a lot of hints or advice that's given to you that you don't really know how to interpret it, because you don't know like the rest of the information you need.
Yeah.
It'll say like, yeah, go do this, but you're like, well, what's that? Where is that? One guy says, I know the whatever MacGuffin thing he's talking about is that way. He doesn't point or anything. He just says it's that way, like it's in that direction. And I'm like, okay, I don't know what you're talking about. But I did the same thing where I didn't talk to Zeus first. I went to the town, and nobody was going to help me, because you're supposed to go and kind of like get the task from the gods. And then once you go back, it's like, I guess the idea is like, oh my God, like Zeus sent you, like, yeah, whatever you need, It's like, that's cool, but it's also a little missable.
Yeah, I think that stuff works nicely into the next thing I wanted to talk about, which is that there is an element of non-linear gameplay here, even in the sense of, we were saying Metroidvania, but a lot of times that kind of thing is like, oh, you get a new item that allows you to explore a previously explored area, but in a new way that you'll unlock new things. I don't think this game quite has that, but instead what it has going for it is it'll tell you, like, hey, you're probably not, like, strong enough for this area. I'd advise you to stay out. But it doesn't stop you from entering. There's a few items that are, like, gatekeeping you from, like, hidden cave entrances and stuff like that. But for the most part, like, say you don't go talk to Zeus right away, I think you can even get all the way down to, like, Athens without ever, like, speaking to any NPC, and the game doesn't say, like, you're going, like, really far away from where you need to be right now. It doesn't hold your hand in that kind of way.
I mean, but that's not really that far. It's like not much progress. It's far, like, as the crow flies, but just going to Athens doesn't mean you've made progress in the actual game.
Yeah, but theoretically, you could already do, like, some side quests and pick up, like, that, the staff, right? Is that what you get? The staff of Fennel?
Yeah, that
from that woman. Yeah, like
I'd
you
say
could
that's
get some of that
like
stuff
soft locked behind the shield because of the enemy guarding the
yes, and
trigger for
that's
that,
why I said theoretically, but I'm saying, like, the game doesn't, like, lock this content behind particular items being unlocked or they're just triggered by you going to those areas, and those areas aren't gate kept by items. So I feel like I don't know. I thought that was a nice touch that you can explore and do wrong in this game.
Yeah,
it's not confusing though. I guess it's not for me. I never felt like I don't know where the hell I am or what I'm supposed to do.
I don't agree with that, but I'm sure we'll get there.
And I guess I'm not being entirely, like, truthful there too, because with a game of this scale, I played with a guide, so.
Okay, that's why.
I could understand. Yeah, I could understand that if you're not playing with a guide or at least with some kind of map, it is a little tricky to figure out, especially given that entrances to new areas are also the same as entrances to, like, people's houses and such. It's not really well communicated when you're moving on, because sometimes when you move on, you're just progressing to the next section of the same area in another screen by just going to the right, and then you kind of hit these dead ends. Dead ends don't necessarily lead to doors that will take you to the next area. You might have missed that door a while back and just not known about it.
Yeah, the navigation in this game is also one of the reasons why I wouldn't call it a Metroidvania. Not so much even like the gatekeeping item portion of it. It's because the way that a Metroidvania sets up its stuff, it's a lot easier to get a lay of the land, and because it's all in the same plane. Like, it's all over 2D space, but you don't ever go into a door that puts you on another layer of the game that is gonna, like, wormhole back into the primary layer in some other weird portal. It's just all there. And one of my main problems with playing this game was just I did not have a sense of direction. And yeah, I know I could have used a walkthrough just to have, like, walk through the second weird door to your right, and then it's just more so like following instructions than actually, like, knowing where you are. And I just couldn't get beyond that in some senses.
Yeah, I was, like, torn because at first, when I first played it, or when I first started it, I was like, wow, compared to Zelda 2 and Faxanadu, the like, information you get from NPCs is even better. Is, like, has really, like, makes me feel like, oh, maybe I don't need a guide for this game, because they are really telling me a lot of things. Like, they're telling me a lot of information that, like, maybe this really does, like, kind of feel more like an RPG that I'm more used to, of a more modern type of game where it's like, oh, I can do this without a guide because it's all there in the game. But like I said, a lot of that information is not, like, complete, or, like, doesn't actually guide you to what to do next. It says, like, this is what you need to get next. And I'm like, okay, well, I have no idea where that is. Like, and yes, you can just explore until you find it, but that feels like it does sometimes miss the purpose of having those NPCs telling you what to do next. Because if you tell me this is what I need next, that's the same as me not knowing what I need next. If I don't know where, like, have a hint as to where I need to go. Like, if you just say you need this thing, and it's like, just explore until you find it. If you didn't tell me that, I would have just explored until I found the next thing. So, like, that element of it, like, kind of made me, like, of two minds. Like, at first, I was like, they did a lot well about making this feel like you're not, like, aimless. But then there are, like, I also used a guide, and there were, like, a lot of parts in the guide where it was like, okay, go through the first door after this, and then go through the third door after that, and then 2 doors to the right of that one, and then 1 door to the right of this. And I'm like, maybe there was some way I could have solved that with the information in the game that wasn't just guess and check. But, like, so, like, if I play this game a lot more and I find out, like, oh, wait, I was just missing things, then I'll take this back. But I don't think that is the case. I think that it's just another one of those games that you really need a guide, which hasn't been necessarily the kiss of death for other games that I've needed a guide that I still really loved, but it was not a point in its favor.
Joe, you're talking about the NPC dialogue on a lot of like, you know, they tell you to go to this thing, right? Usually with NPCs in these kinds of games, both in Simon's Quest and in Zelda 2 in some regards, we've been upset with the localization and just the truth of what they're saying and the validity of the statements they're making. You know, that's what we usually complain about. That's not necessarily the case here, but I think that, you know, this is a very boring example of like what could happen if it was all correct anyway, because it winds up being something where even if you could understand, you know, with hindsight, like having maybe
vague.
Right, it would just be vague. It's just go or do X and you will get Y. And you know, seeing it now with a game that actually got it all right, it seems like, wow, it actually isn't a very interesting mechanic. And obviously modern NPCs have figured this out a lot better. But for a game that's setting itself up to be this grand story, I feel like they could have added more color to these NPCs than just flat out saying go to X and get Y.
Yeah, like one example of, it was still very simple dialogue, but it at least felt like you were having an impact on this world, and it wasn't just a bunch of trivia knowledge keepers that were in all of these towns. Was when, you know, you're actually kind of just, it's not really a side quest because you do need the staff, but when you go through the town that's next to Athens that I don't remember the name of, you're talking to this woman that's like, oh, my child has been kidnapped by a witch or a harpy or whatever she is. And then the father is like, hey, my daughter lost her kid. Can you go find it? Then you go and you fight this like mini boss, and then you go into the cave and you find the kid, and then you bring word back that you found the kid. It might still be playing in the cave for some reason. You don't see him leave, but then you talk to the mother, and she's like, "Oh, thank you. Here's the thing. My dad knows more about the thing. You should talk to him." And then you go and talk to him, and he's like, "Oh, Prometheus. He's got he knows how to use this thing." I liked that. It felt like, you know, conversations more so than, you know, this guy Hephaestus makes really great swords. Just wanted to let you know that.
Yeah, it felt like you exist in this world.
Yeah.
Right. The follow-up is good on those things, too. The fact that the NPC first leads you to a boss fight, if you will, and then you complete the boss fight, and then that same NPC then leads you to the next thing. Like, that feels a lot better than when you first... what town are you in when you first start the game? Arcadia?
Yes.
Okay, yeah. When you're in Arcadia, there's a bunch of NPCs that you could talk to, but unless you're, like, have a notepad out and are writing these things down, you're gonna have to go like check back in with them at some point for what kind of clues they gave you, because it's not stuff that's immediately happening, and there is no, oh, go follow back up with my brother in Arcadia. He lives in the first house to the left. Like, that would be stupid. But, like, you know, how else would they tell you, I guess? You know, there's not a lot of that in this game.
Yeah, it was just a very memorable example of the few times it does that.
Many locations in this game, but I feel like it suffers a little from that Simon's Quest problem where you have to walk between every location. So if you ever, you know, in a game that tells you, like, first you go here and then you go there and then you go back there, there is a lot of backtracking in this game, a little more than even Xanadu had. But this game is large, so if you want to, for whatever reason, go all the way back to Arcadia at some point, it's a lot of backtracking and walking through and dealing with, you know, enemies are always kind of just a nuisance at any level. You know, the nicer your sword is, doesn't mean that the kind of bats that fly around or even those blue slimes that you start off with in the game, like, those things are still going to be something that you're going to have to either dodge to make sure that you don't die from. My point just being that Zelda 2's world map solved all of this by just making, like, the overworld something that's very quick to move between town to town, and then, like, the dungeons and towns are really big once you get inside of them. It feels weird in Battle of Olympus, where if you're 3 towns away from where you need to be, it's like, guess I just gotta go all the way back the way I already came, even though I don't think I'm gonna discover anything new. And that could have been solved with some Metrovania-like elements, but as Sean's already discussed, that doesn't quite happen in this game.
Yeah, on paper, I think that I agree with that. Like, that when you say it, I'm like, yeah, that's poorly designed. But something about these games, I mean, because Xanadu did sort of a similar thing, like you said, and I feel like sometimes the right amount of backtracking, if it's not too much, like, doesn't hurt with, like, the immersiveness. And, like, I guess the fact that this game doesn't feel quite so like it feels big because there's all these different locations and stuff, but really, when you think about it, it's not, each location is not that big. And it never felt to me like a slog to have to go through it. It felt like I was getting familiar with the world, and it kind of felt cool to me after a little while when it's like, when I was like, oh, I gotta, you know, go back to Attica. Like, I know how to get there from here. I remember this. Here's our little journey, you know, that's kind of maybe made the like farming that I needed to do later for money a little more tolerable because I was already doing it while I'm, like, traveling. And then also the fact that I'd say less than halfway through the game, I'm guessing, I can't remember, but, like, you get this fast travel option, which is not a perfect fast travel option as far as player convenience, but it makes it it usually seems to be designed in a way where, like, it'll take you to where you probably want to go next.
Wait, can you describe this? Because I don't think I got there.
Yeah, so what it is you get the harp. And if you go to, I'm trying to remember what they are. There's, like, these statues that are in each area. If you go to it and play the harp, a Pegasus will come down and take you to another town. But you don't choose the town. Each one has, like, a fixed place you go to from that town.
Okay.
So it's, like, kind of weird. But, like, if you're in, what is it? Peloponnesus? Is that what it's called?
Yep.
You know, I think it takes you back to Arcadia.
So each town, like, wherever the Pegasus is, like, it will only bring you to one other town. It's not like a random town.
Like, from there, it'll only ever take you to Arcadia. But then, like, from Arcadia, I actually didn't test if it just will take you back to Peloponnesus. I think it probably takes you somewhere else. But I think it's designed where it's probably where you want to go next.
Okay.
Because I never had a problem with, like, oh shit, how do I get there? It was always like, oh, perfect, it's exactly where I want to go. But it feels like also if you really wanted to, I mean, maybe it's just a little bit of a tedious prototype for a fast travel system, but it feels like if I really wanted to get to one, I could just fly to one. This isn't where I wanted to go. Fly again. This isn't where I want to go. Fly again. Oh, okay, here I am. So, like, kind of uncool, but it still feels like a reward because it takes away the, like, weight of having to long travel everywhere. It feels like progress.
Yeah, maybe a little clumsy in execution, but definitely better than I don't think Simon's Quest ever offered anything in the idea of fast travel. So could be better, but we'll take it. And you're right, actually, the Harp of Apollo, I wouldn't even say like mid game. I think you get that fairly early fairly early on, not like right away.
Well, I didn't get it.
I'd say a third of the game.
There you
Third
go.
game.
Third of the game in. Everybody knows where the third of the game mark is. It says it on the screen, right? It says you have now
Right.
made it 1/3 of the way through. Once you collect the harp,
Exactly.
actually.
Is it like after the just after the Hydra Boy? I mean, I got through the Hydra Boy.
The Hydra Boy. Yeah,
Okay.
I think it is actually the next thing after the Hydra.
Oh,
Right.
wow. Whoops.
It could be, or somewhere close to there.
Let's talk about the items in the game, and not just the harp and the ocarina and stuff like that, but also your weaponry, because that upgrades. It's not just you got from club to sword, and your strength went up like +1. There are like some cool items that you can either miss or collect, or they give you like a new ability. I think in terms of comparing it to Zelda again, I feel like there was some exciting items in this game that kept me on my toes in terms of like what I was about to receive.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, there are the ones that we talked about that are like sort of just making it so you've unlocked things. Like there's the one that's like the eye that lets you see hidden doors. Like that one is just like, okay, this is just here for progress. But a bunch of them are like, yeah, they feel like tools that can be used in different ways. Even like you said, the weapons. You get the club and you get the sword. Like, yeah, that's just a strength boost. But then there's like the staff that does the same thing as the sword, but then you also have a projectile you can shoot out of it. Like, it's not just like they made, there's some intention to each like upgrade to your items as well.
This is what I've been asking for like since we started this podcast, was like like when your upgrades aren't just a step up in terms of damage scale, or just another way to make something a key. Like it's actually, you can use this in different ways. Like Apollo, you can jump higher, and when I got it, I thought that's all it did. But then you can stand on the ceiling, and I was just like, oh, that's cool. I didn't think that would have like a secondary effect. And it's the same with the staff. It's like, okay, yeah, it has a little bit more damage at first, and then you finally talk to Prometheus, and it gives you the projectile. So I really like the way they did the upgrades in this game.
Yeah, and again, that's another great story element too, of like, you don't just get the staff and it shoots fire. You have to speak to Prometheus in order to theoretically have been trained to learn how to do that thing. Some people might say that's tedious. I don't know. I think in this kind of game where they're trying to talk about like, a hero on his journey learning how to take down Hades, like that's pretty cool that they took that extra step there. Because you're right, like the staff by itself is more powerful than the club, so it's already got like some kind of boost to it. Interestingly enough, they also put some trade-offs, at least in the staff, where those salamanders are fire resistant. So when you're down in the salamander cave, you can't just shoot flames at them. To deal with them, you have to hit them. Still with the staff is fine, but you have to hit them. You can't just spam fire at them and collect olives nonstop from them.
Yeah. But to that point, you don't feel like, okay, I've got the next step up in weapons, so I'll never go back to the other weapon. There are reasons to switch. I think that the sword actually has better, I could be wrong, it has better attack power than the staff if you're just hitting things.
That is true.
So that would make it like beneficial. Like, okay, I'm going to fight a bunch of salamanders. I'm going to switch to the sword. And then eventually you get the whatever the super powerful sword is after the staff.
The Master Sword.
The Divine Sword. Yeah, the Master Sword. And no, you get the Divine Sword, and that's more powerful than the staff and has a projectile, but the projectile drains like 1/2 point of your health every time you use it. So it's like, it's better, but like you might want to switch. Like I found myself switching back to the staff sometimes too. Like it was never like, okay, well that's worthless now because I got the next thing. There was always decisions to be made as to like, except for the club, but you never go back to the club.
Well, that feels like a good segue into the battle system, which is a whole nother part of this game. So far, we have been focusing just on the exploration and story elements of this game, but it now feels like a good time to talk about the battle system since we've talked about some of the items you'll unlock. You know, I think we talked about, like, in Zelda 2, it's really cool how fight scenes are brought down like duels on the overworld. Like, you just you run into an enemy and then it just brings you into a screen, and it's almost like a sword fighting matchup, a 1v1 where you're trying to take control of the screen. This is more like Xanadu in that regard, where enemies are always just on the side-scrolling part of it, and you only ever fight them that way. I'll just start with the very beginning of the game to see why I don't really like this kind of combat. It's not my preferred way. It's not the worst thing in the world, but those blue slimes that you can only attack when they jump, but they fall from the ceiling, and, you know, that's just be mindful or whatever. But then they continue to move towards you constantly at this, like, sluggish pace, and you can try to crouch, but you still can't hit them. And keep in mind, this is the very first enemy in the game. So you have to be properly positioned for when they jump, since you need to be standing in the correct spot at the same time. I suppose you could just keep your distance and try to lunge forward at them with a sword jump to time when they jump in the air. And yeah, these guys don't do a ton of damage, and it's not the end of the world or anything, but for this to be the first experience with the battle system, it showed me the limitations of, you know, like, of this kind of fighting, that, like, that it does take some precision striking, and that the enemies are more powerful and in some regards less vulnerable than the player.
Yeah, the anything that's too short is incredibly frustrating. You don't have to be standing in a specific spot to hit those little slimes. Like, if you just crouch and just spam the sword while it approaches you, it will eventually jump into your sword. But regardless, the kind of philosophy that seems to have gone into enemy placement in this game is sort of all over the place. Like, in some places, the enemies seem to be very specifically placed that you, like, have to, like, bait them out and, like, jump over on them, or bait them out and fight them normally, or, like, it's intentional. And then there's times where it just feels like, let's just cram as much stuff as we can on the screen, and they'll get hit like 3 times in a row and eventually fall down a hole. That's sort of how it felt. Like, there wasn't any it didn't feel across the board like they were trying to do the same thing.
I had sort of like an interesting relationship with the battle system here, because to start, I really liked it. Yes, the slime thing kind of weird that the first enemy is too low to the ground for you to hit. I think there is only one other enemy that does that, though. Towards the end, is the caterpillar, as far as I can remember. So, like, that's definitely weird. Like, especially that's the first enemy. I never felt like they were, like, cramming too much on the screen ever. Like, I always felt like it always felt pretty intentional. Yeah, there were some that would, like, respawn when you killed them, like we've seen in some other games, but it was never to that, like, really annoying, like, Karate Kid level where it really bothered me that much. But the thing is when I first started, I really liked it, and there was something about it that I was like, this feels better than I was used to from what I remember. It's been a while, but from Zelda 2 or Xanadu. And I couldn't put my finger on what it was about it. It was like, oh, like, this combat feels really good, and it feels really, like, responsive and whatnot. As the game went on, I could not put my finger on it. Like, I was just getting really bored of the combat. Like, it was hard at sometimes and whatnot, but, like, by the end, I was like, something about it was just, like, not holding my attention. And I think what I realized was that what I had mistaken for, like, really good one-to-one input recognition really also kind of amounted to, like, just there's no cooldown to your attack. So, like, Sean, like you said, if you rapid fire that button above the slime, and it'll jump into your sword as long as you're hitting it quickly enough. There are some enemies where, like, it would jump at me like those monkeys playing around that are really annoying. They would jump at me, and it would feel like I could hit them a bunch of time, and that kind of freezes them for a second. But then it would break out of that and still hit me. But then I realized, if I hit faster, if I really go rapid fire, I can hit it an extra time and kill it, which makes it eventually feel like, the fact that like Zelda 2 has that cooldown, which makes it a little more challenging and just makes it a little more like I have to think a little more, even if it's like a fraction. Like my brain is working a little more to make it like a challenge rather than just, hey, just spam A as fast as I can. I'm making it sound really negative, but it was like that was what made me realize like why I got like a little more tired of this combat more quickly than I did for Zelda 2 or Faxanadu.
And you kind of have to spam sometimes, given where you are in the caves or specific locations in the overworld, because enemies do just continue to spawn and, approach you pretty quickly. So you kind of have to take a backseat to progress and either, try to jump around them and just forget them altogether, or stand there, stab, move a little bit, another enemy spawns in, a scorpion or something, and then get rid of them, keep moving just a little bit, like inching your way. It's almost like a game of football where you're just kind of, nothing's really like intimidating you that much, but you're just inching closer to the end zone across plays. That's kind of how I had the experience with these normal enemies in the game, just the ones that you'll see over and over and over again. The boss fights, which we'll get into in a minute, much more creative, but these enemies, just back to my point that I guess I was trying to make with the first enemies too, is just that they feel like they're coming at you a lot quicker in a larger number, and also with a lot of different types. That your hero adventure thing, like the idea of you being someone who's going to take down Hades, right? The little guys ruin that, and then the bosses make you feel like big and cool again.
Yeah, I mean, again, it's also, I think, a part of the patterns that these enemies, with enough of them on the screen, do. Like they're either just jumping maniacally around, or they're just moving towards you at a constant rate, and at maybe like moving at random too. It's really hard to anticipate. Like there's no tells. It doesn't feel like you're very skilled when you take them down, and just again the density of it. It's hard to make it feel like a hand-picked thing when all this stuff is going on.
The boss fights, by comparison, have this thing where, sometimes it's just hit them with a specific weapon or hit them only in this body part. You see that a lot, but I feel like that reward of, the Cyclops, right? Figure out that you have to not only hit him in the eye, but hit him with the sword specifically to do any damage. The Cyclops is not an impossible enemy. It's more about figuring out what you have to do to take them down. That feels more rewarding as a combat encounter than these Castlevania-like moments on the screen, which, this game really isn't a platformer for the most part. It's all, there's not many pitfalls other than in the caves and stuff like that. I feel like the enemies aren't doing a good job, but the bosses redeem it. Because there's even ones like that siren where you have to first play the harp to avoid being drawn in by her, and then you could start attacking her. Little things like that make the boss fights feel plussed up, even if their sprites aren't particularly grand or their battles, cue in like anything extra.
Yeah, like it's just a more focused experience when you're fighting these instead of the randomly placed enemies.
It definitely felt like the boss fights were designed in a way where they were not like super hard technically. Like they all only took a few hits to kill, but to, like you're saying, the fact that there's like this other element that like is immersive in the world that you have to figure out, and like it's some technical gameplay thing you have to do makes like that feel like the interesting like challenge of the boss fight, rather than like, can I hit it this many times before it hits me that many times?
And there's a good variety of these boss fights too. It's not, I guess like it depends on what you call a boss fight, but like even that bull that guards the Temple of Zeus, not a challenging thing at all, right? Like it's just a unique sprite that happens to rev up first, telling you that it's going to start charging at you. Then it charges at you, and if you time your hit right, he just gets like a little knockback and then charges you again. Like he's a stubborn bull, you know? He's not supposed to be something, you know, an unprepared player could die from him, right? But for the most part, it's just supposed to be a teachable moment. There's a lot of those kinds of enemies in this game that are just one-off fights.
Yeah, and that adds to the world building too. And I think actually most of those enemies I found easier than regular enemies, but it was cool because it was like, oh, this is the spot where the bull guards.
Right. I think that's what I'm trying to get at too, is that this game is at its best when it's doing that job of telling the story through gameplay. It never, I think, other than like when you run into the whatever you name the princess, when you run into her, that's when it like finally skips to cutscene. Other than that, all the game story is told in gameplay, and so I feel like it's at its best when it continues to do that, not when it relies on the NPCs to tell you, go get this, and things will change. Joe, did you beat the game?
I didn't beat the game. I think I got to maybe like the second to last thing. I think I was not in Tartarus or Hades, which I assume is where you end. But what was it, like the Phthia or whatever? Maybe that was the last one, or the one across the road. But yeah, I was in like the second to last dungeon where there's like, I assume it's the second to last, where there's like layers of the dungeon. You can go like through these different doors, like back into the background or come out into the foreground.
Right. Maybe that was Tartarus. I can't remember.
It might have been. Yeah.
I only asked because I didn't get to the end either, but my understanding is that the shadow fight in this game is significantly easier than the Zelda 2 shadow fight, which some consider to be, you know, one of the hardest boss fights in a NES game that is otherwise beatable. You know, we have NES hard games, but then there's games that, like, you know, Nintendo makes like that just throw you a bone every now and again. And this game, I feel like, yeah, it's on the longer side, and it does require a guide, in my opinion. Sean, I applaud you for trying it without it, but I think with a guide and with some time, this is a beatable game, and that also like deserves some acknowledgement too, because some of these NES games just reach a point where they get too hard, or they throw so many enemies at you that you're not supposed to, like, you know, maybe like through luck you'll get through eventually. This game never really relies on any sense of luck or bad RNG. This is a game that's mostly about the adventure.
Yeah, and even like obviously I didn't beat this game either, but even looking at the boss fight, it's more so just a little gimmick where you have to look at the upside down version of your fight instead of where you're actually standing. But it's still like, that would be a memorable moment for me if I played this when it came out. Like, wow, that was so cool. I had to like learn that I was playing, that I had to look at the water. Like, isn't that fun?
Yeah, it's like you see, I'm just watching it now too for the first time, but you see your character, and then his shadow is below you, and then there's like a shadow enemy that's also below you. So like, yeah, it's like a mirror image of the fight.
Yeah, I'm not sure why it just kind of looks like a ninja. Like, is Hades a ninja? But maybe in this version of Greek mythology,
right, where you're Orpheus that can't fit in your name. You have to spell it differently in order to fit it.
And if you look at like a walkthrough for the Battle of Olympus, one on Mike's RPG Center, I am not related to this Mike, on the walkthrough, they just do it in bullet points, and they make the game seem so basic and simple the way that they describe it, because this isn't like a game FAQ thing where it's all like nicely formatted and everything. This is just bullet points with text. But just to read off like the first 4 bullet points from Arcadia. Make your way across Arcadia until you reach the white building and enter. On the other side of the passage, you'll have to fight the bull, hit it 4 times on the head when it charges at you to kill it. Continue on and enter Zeus's palace. Kneel before him and speak to him. Now the other gods will help you in your quest. Speak to him or any of the other gods at any time to receive your password. Return to the main area of Arcadia and enter the lower door in the building to the west to reach Attica. It's like, that makes it seem like pretty dry. But that's the difference between the actual gameplay experience of playing Battle of Olympus and like talking about it now, right? Like talking about the plot points here. It's not the same, it's the same thing with like how the story didn't quite add up to what the gameplay was giving us. I think they created a larger game than they could describe.
Yeah, I also think that the way that is written, like, because like this game is big enough that you can get lost, there is a need for a like sort of step-by-step process like that. But in games that are just as in games that engage you just as much, like Doom would just be like, get to end, kill everything, and then the next level would be get to end, kill everything, flip switch, kill the rest. Like, it doesn't need to be a full paragraph. I think a lot of game FAQs walkthroughs go into a little bit too much detail, so I kind of like this laconic version.
I do too, but the issue that not the issue, but like the thing about using the guide for me with this game was, I used a guide for Zelda 2 and for Faxanadu, and I had a great time with it that way, but those games I felt so much more like I could look at the guide and say, what do I do next? And it's like, okay, next I have to get this thing. Put the guide down and then spend 20 minutes doing that thing. Where it's like, even if I don't read exactly what to do beat for beat, I can stick with the, I know my goal, and the game can help me figure that out. With this, I didn't feel like I had that option as much. Like, I felt like I really needed to know beat for beat what to do next. So, like, it did sort of devolve at some points into, like, just for my experience, because I was using a guide, into, like, a very, like, surgical experience where I'm like, okay, go through this door. Okay, wait, before I do anything else, because I'll get lost. Look back at the guide. Okay, next, what do I do? Like,
I felt that specifically in the forest, which was, like, what convinced me that I just don't like this form of navigation. But I know what you're feeling.
Yeah, because obviously I'm like comparing it now to these other games that were similar, and I didn't have that experience so much with those games, so like it felt a little disappointing on that side for me.
And the story does miss every now and again too. It's not, they're trying to tell it all through gameplay, but it's not necessarily always successful. I didn't find out until looking at one of the guides that before you approach the final boss with Hades, there's a room, just one door leading to another, and there's like a statue in the middle of the room, and you're just supposed to know that that's your that's your like princess that you're trying to rescue, but she's been turned to stone by Hades. It's like it's never pointed out. It's not like, I don't know, it's not like the most elegant way to describe that kind of situation. Like, it would have been cool if we would have seen Hades' like other form and him casting that spell on her. Like, first we thought we rescued her, successfully got to the end, and then it's like, oh nope, here's this gotcha. But instead you just walk into the room, she's already a statue, there's no interaction, there's no pause.
Also, isn't that supposed to be a thing? Like, I don't quite remember who. Is it Orpheus?
Gorgons, like,
no. Like, the dude goes into Hades, goes into Tartarus and talks to Hades and is like, yeah, you can take her, but you can't. This is Persephone, I think. I don't know. But you can't look back behind you to see if she's still following you. And then he's like, he does, and then she turns to stone. Or something like that. Maybe I'm mixing up my mythology, but it just felt wrongly applied.
I was trying to find out the answer for you, Sean, but instead I got a much more interesting question on Google. Can Medusa turn Hades to stone?
Ooh.
And I that's like just an interesting question. The answer is apparently not, because Medusa did not have the power to turn gods to stone.
That wasn't on the back of the box of the Medusa.
Right. On the sequels and spin-off side, we have a Game Boy version of the Battle of Olympus, released much later in 1993. And if you're starting to ask yourself, wait a minute, I had a Game Boy. I had a lot of games on the Game Boy. Why didn't I get Battle of Olympus on Game Boy? It's because it was actually only released in Europe. So this is a very, series of strange events, but it must have been that a European developer specifically ported the game over to Game Boy, and then Nintendo or whoever was just like, cool, release it, but don't bother translating it or doing whatever. I mean, like, surely it's in English, right? If I don't know, for the UK or something.
Maybe it's just in Greek.
Yeah, maybe it was just for Greek audiences. Interestingly enough, though, it's pretty much the same game. It's not worth pointing out what the differences are. They pretty much ported the NES game over to, the Game Boy has that weird thing where sprites are slightly bigger, so in order to communicate detail. So there's a lot of scrolling going on and a lot of like unanticipated collisions. Yeah. So this version isn't perfect, but nevertheless, there was a way to play Battle of Olympus on the go. Well, I think we have to go.
I knew that was what you were gonna do.
I have to go to the bathroom.
Wait, Sean, before you go to the bathroom,
all right,
there is one other thing we have to do.
Oh,
and that is
that
the essential games list. Sean, you first.
Yeah, I've got pretty mixed feelings about this game. I did enjoy playing it, but a lot of the same frustrations that I felt in other similar games are still here, and one of those is just like these open world 2D scrollers where it's not all on the same plane. This is a very specific gripe that I have, and where you go in like into the back of the game and you're supposed to sort of like have your heading or just use a guide. I can't do that. I can't navigate games like this, and that's a huge reason why I am of two minds on this game. The other being that, like we've described, like the combat and enemies are kind of haphazard, in my opinion. I do think it's one of the more clearly described, like, how do I get from point A to point B in terms of like what you're supposed to do, maybe not how you're supposed to get there. In terms of the NPCs and the environment. But I'm going to have to just like settle for a play it here and not recommend this be on the essential games list. It's totally like above average.
All right, that's what we'd love to hear. You might think I'm going to go to Joe next, but I've thought about it, and I've been going to Joe second for a really long time, and I'd like to go second. So, Joe, you're going to finish us off today.
You've earned it.
Thank you. I've earned second.
Yeah.
I think the Battle of Olympus is a great adventure game, filled with mostly like the vague idea of fetch quests. That's making it sound very boring, but it is really just like go get this thing and then go get that thing. There's no like...
We didn't talk about olives.
Right. The olives that you need to go ahead and purchase. Like, get 50 of these and I'll give you a very... an item you need. That's not even my problem. And fetch quest is being mean here. I guess what I'm saying is like there wasn't the Triforce element, right? Where it's like, oh, defeat these people to get this thing that will bring you to the boss. It didn't quite have that. It was mostly like get this thing, then get that thing. There's some moderate, I guess, puzzle solving on at least like without a guide. There's some of that going on. That's all like good things, in my opinion. I actually feel like the combat is the thing that keeps the Battle of Olympus off the essential games list for me. And not just because the enemies were difficult. It's not about their difficulty, even though maybe that's what I made it sound like. I think it's just that that's a very monotonous thing that happens all the time. When you're not like actually exploring and trying to figure out what to do next on your grand quest, you're just dealing with these enemies over and over and over again. It just doesn't make for a very interesting game. So it's not on my essential games list vote, and I'm not going to vote for it. But on a more interesting note, this game made me kind of want to revisit Zelda 2, because I have a feeling that the combat is much better in Zelda 2, and Zelda 2 was kind of doing the same thing adventure-wise that Battle of Olympus was doing, so maybe that could push it over the edge and finally onto the essential games list, but we need everybody else to agree as well. Joe?
Every single one of you.
Forget about Zelda 2. Forget that I even mentioned it, because I know you're going to say essential. We're talking about the Battle of Olympus. What is your vote for that game?
So, I'm a sucker for this kind of game. I think that, like, this format just does a really good job of giving you that feeling of going on an adventure. So I really, really liked this game a lot. And if it seems like in the episode I had a lot to say that was negative about it, that's because throughout the episode I have been trying to justify why I am also not going to vote it essential. And that's because most of what I've already said, but like the major thing that I couldn't put my finger on about what I wasn't enjoying about this game as much as those other games is, if I'm pressed to come up with the answer, is that attacking element where I start to feel like I got kind of bored of it because it wasn't giving me the, like, challenge isn't the right word, but like it wasn't giving my like brain the challenge that I wanted, where like I gotta like have a little bit of thought put into like when I attack and not just attack. I mean, granted, there are times where something swoops down at you, you gotta time it right, but it just got tedious to me for that. That combined with like the element that feels like a maze in which I need to really be looking back and forth between the guide and the game over and over again keeps it from the level of Faxanadu or Zelda 2, which I love so much. So I also sometimes have a tough time like remembering that I don't have to decide if something is either essential or horrible. I think this is a fantastic game, and I think it's definitely a play it. It's just not quite up to the standard of those other games that I think are better.
I like that. That's a good point, especially with people who have gripes about some things that are and are not on the essential games list. There's a whole like play it section that just isn't interesting, right? Like, we're not trying to make a play it list. You can decide what you want to play and stuff like that. We do keep that on the website.
Yeah, we'll still tell you.
Yeah, we have that if you're interested. Yeah, if you want to live your life being told what to do by three guys, like, you know, I guess we could put in like other columns too for just other random information. Could have a wheel that just spins every game we've covered so far, and whatever it lands on, that's what you have to play that day, or that week, or that whole year.
Wow.
We could do that. Instead, what we're going to do is we're going to keep recording episodes of Nostalgia. Next week, we have the spiritual successor to the Battle of Olympus, Championship Bowling. Thank you for the one laugh, Sean. I agree. Sensible chuckle.
It's a very
it's like an olive.
Chuckle,
a bowling ball is like an olive.
Yeah, of course. Bowling, it was probably Homer from The Simpsons loves to bowl, and Homer wrote the Odyssey.
That's true.
Wow.
And if you only root for teams in your city, you're a homer.
There you go. Now, if Championship Bowling is like, yeah, I'll take it or leave it, I could use better games. Why don't you check out our other podcast, Nostalgia Bites, which is exclusive to our Patreon, patreon.com/nostalgia to join. And we are doing the Portopia Serial Murder Case, which is a game that only was ever released in Japan, but got a fun English translation, and is kind of like one of the first text-based adventure games ever in Japan, that I think came out first on computers, but then eventually on Famicom. So it has, again, a non-linear storytelling with detective elements, and you can interrogate people, and you can pick up evidence, and you can take notes and ask people questions and visit locations.
Like if you go into a building with a toilet, can you flush the toilet?
You can use a payphone.
All right. Well, we'll see. I'll play it.
Okay, yeah, I think you'll have to for the episode, because the patrons, we're giving them what they pay for.
That's true. They do pay for this.
Yeah, we lock Portopia Serial Murder Case because it's a good game. We lock that behind Nostalgia Bites. But if you want the free content, we'll keep making episodes like Championship Bowling. Yeah. That's how this whole podcast works. We decide for arbitrarily what Nintendo releases in chronological order, and then just put that on the free feed.